Hello and welcome to Cupcake Addiction's classic giant cupcake tutorial, where I'll be showing you how to make this gorgeous, kind of cartoony, classic looking giant cupcake. Tools and equipment that we will be using today: I have my little shaker filled with some cornflour. You can also use icing sugar. I've got a paintbrush, a little bit of water. I've got a large choc orange ball. You can also use a gumball or a gobstopper, and some little sprinkles that I've made. I'll show you how to make those shortly. I've got a pizza cutter, a rolling pin or a fondant roller, and I'm using an offset spatula, but you can also use the back of a butter knife. I've got a little bit of white fondant, and I've got some pink modelling chocolate. We do have a great recipe and tutorial for modelling chocolate on our channel, and I'll leave a link to it in the description box below. I also have some of our perfectly pipeable buttercream frosting, which I've popped into a piping bag. Pop that into a piping bag with any nozzle you like, but I'm using the Loyal number 20. Once again, recipe and tutorial for that on our channel, and the link is below. For my giant cupcake, I've basically gone through the steps of our giant cupcake basics. So we've got a whole series on the giant cupcake, everything from making your lovely chocolate cupcake base to baking it, carving it, stacking it, and crumb coating it, getting it to this stage ready for decorating. Once again, links down below. And I've decided to use a red velvet cake today, and we've got a good red velvet cake recipe on our channel. Let's get started. First thing that I want to do is take that piping bag. Now, if you don't have a piping bag, don't worry too much. You can just spatula it on, but I find the piping bag a little bit neater. So I'm just going to turn the cupcake. I've got mine on a little bit of a turntable, but if you don't have it, you can just follow it around. Go around the top of it. Try not to drop any of that icing off. I've got mine all sitting on an iced cake board. I've got a good tutorial on my channel on how to ice a cake board, and I always ice mine because I think it just makes it a little bit neater and adds a bit more colour to your cake. So now that I've got just a bit of a rough looking swirl on top, I'm going to take that spatula and just smear it on. We've crumb coated, so most of those crumbs should get caught in below that frosting. Alright, so I've got a bit of a rough buttercream frostinged giant cupcake there. Now I'm going to take some of that pink modelling chocolate. I'm just going to roll a sausage. So I'm going to roll it back here, and basically I'm just rolling that back and forward to get a nice sausage, and we're going to use this to make the swirl pattern underneath the fondant. So it's going to give us that really kind of cartoony looking swirl. You can put down a little bit of cornflour if you find it sticking too much. Okay, now don't particularly worry if it's not long enough, because you can always roll a little bit more. So I'm going to take it, and I'm just going to make a little circle on the top of the cupcake. That's going to be to hold our cherry on. And then I just want to take it around the cupcake. You can see here it's kind of stretched out a little bit. I don't want that, so I'm just going to pull that off and just reattach. You want to do this while your buttercream's relatively fresh, because the buttercream will form a bit of a crust. Once it forms a crust, it won't have things stick to it quite as well. So I need a little bit more sausage there. Okay, so you should have something that looks like this. Kind of messy. It's just going to give us a basic sort of a swirly shape underneath that modelling chocolate. From here, we're going to roll the modelling chocolate out, pop that cupcake off to the side, make ourselves a little bit of room, and a bit of that cornflour. Now that's just going to help stop the modelling chocolate from sticking to the surface that we're rolling on. I'm going to give that modelling chocolate just a really quick knead in between my hands. Don't knead it for too long because you don't want to over knead it. It'll become sticky and hard to work with. You can also definitely use fondant for this. I'm just using modelling chocolate because I think it tastes a little bit better and it colours up really nicely. So I've got there just a bit of a disc. I'm going to swipe it around in that cornflour to give it a nice coating underneath. And as I mentioned, you can use icing sugar, also known as powdered or confectioner's sugar. And you'll notice that I keep my modelling chocolate moving. So I give it a couple of rolls, turn it around. And I'm going to do that until it's completely rolled out. Alright, so I've got my lovely rolled out piece of modelling chocolate. I'm just going to pick that up and carefully just move it back here a little bit to get that giant cupcake back on the set. Beautiful. Now it's time to lay the modelling chocolate over top of our lovely cupcake. So you want to make sure that it's going to cover right down to the edges. Just lay it on top, just like that. If you need to stretch it down a little bit, you can stretch it. Don't stretch it too much. You don't want to tear it. And I'm just going to just position it so that I'm confident that that modelling chocolate's going over all of those nice edges. Don't worry if you've got any little marks or bits of cornflour or anything like that on your giant cupcake. We can get those out, and we will be putting sprinkles onto this cupcake. So now for our little grooves, I'm just taking my finger and I'm just gently, I guess, massaging the modelling chocolate down into that buttercream frosting. If you do happen to get any little pleats like this, just lift them, tuck them out, and keep massaging. Don't pleat them into the giant cupcake. Now as I get to this bottom layer, I'm actually just tucking up and I'm catching any of that buttercream and just making sure I've got no little pleats, just really tucking up. So I'm sort of going over the edge and then pushing it back up a little bit, and that's just going to catch any of that excess frosting and give us a nice neat edge. I'm actually pushing it into that big chocolate patty pan or that big chocolate cupcake case. Alright, now from here I'm going to take my pizza cutter and I'm just going to come down to the same level as my work and cut just below where I think that giant cupcake top finishes. Don't cut exactly on the line of your giant cupcake because they're going to want to tuck that up a little bit to neaten up our edges. So I'm probably about a finger's width below. You should have a nice little line there, so just separate out your modelling chocolate or your fondant, whatever you're working with. Alright, so we want to neaten up those edges now. So once again, I'm just going to take my fingers around and I'm just going to literally just tuck them up underneath. I made my giant cupcake case in a yellow colour because I wanted it to look like the base of a vanilla cupcake. So you can do it in brown, you can do it in any colour you like. At this point, the top of your cupcake should be starting to look something like this, so you can see that real cartoony look starting to come across. You can just go around and just neaten up any of your little bits of your curl. Make sure that you're tucked in nice and tight there so that you're really emphasising that lovely cupcakey swirl on top. Now it's time for our white fondant. I'm just going to roll out just a little bit of the white fondant. Alright, so I've rolled out my white fondant just so that you can all see what I'm doing. Now this is a bit of an optional extra. You might want to leave it at the bright pink, but I always like to push the boundaries a little bit. So I'm just going to take my pizza cutter and I'm just going to go around in a bit of a, I guess like a splatter type shape. This is going to be our little bit of extra frosting or cream or whatever you want it to be on the top of that cupcake. No real actual right or wrong size, just about as big as you think. That's about the size of my hand. And I'm going to take a little bit of that water. Don't use too much water. I'm just going to put a little dab of it on that modelling chocolate, a little swirl. Doesn't need too much, it's just going to stick on nicely. Take your little bit of white fondant and just positioning it over the top. I'm not going to stick it down just yet. I'm just going to pull it on the edges until I'm happy with how it's sitting. And then same as we did for the pink, I'm just going to fold it into those lovely little pleats or those lovely little lines. And I'm going to take a little bit more water and just lift up the edges so that they're all sticking down nicely. So just lift them up, pop just a little bit of water underneath. You don't want too much water. Water with your fondant actually eats into the fondant, which is what makes it sticky and makes it stick. So a little bit of water turns it into a bit of an adherent or a self-glue, but a lot of water will actually start to eat a hole through your fondant. So just remember less is always more when it comes to your water. If you love our tutorials, make sure that you subscribe to our channel. Lots of great uploads coming up 3 times a week, and I've got some exciting tutorials that I can't wait to share with you in 2013. Alright, so you should have something that looks kind of like that. I'm just going to go and just neaten those edges a little bit. At the end of the day, it's a cupcake. It doesn't have to be perfect, because cupcakes never are. Now, those beautiful sprinkles. As I mentioned, I've pre-made mine because I didn't think that you guys would want to sit there and watch me roll out 100,000 little sprinkles, but I've actually made them rather than using store-bought sprinkles because I want them to be a bit big and I want them to be cartoony and in colours that match. So you can see there, they're just a little roll of either modelling chocolate or fondant. Make them a little bit in advance if you can, or make them before you start, just so that it gives them a little bit of time to set because they're a bit harder to work with when they're really, really fresh and sticky. So to make them, I'm just taking tiny, tiny little bits, that's probably even a bit too much, tiny bits of either fondant or modelling chocolate, and just roll them into a little tiny sausage. So into a ball, and then into a little tiny sausage. And we've done that about 75 times. To stick those ones on, I'm just going to take little bits of water and I'm just going to pop a little dab or a little line wherever I think I'd like a sprinkle. I like to do 3 or 4 at once, and then just position your sprinkles. Now if you're like me and you've gotten a couple of little bits of cornflour, a couple of little marks in that modelling chocolate, just let some of your sprinkles slide off that lovely bit of white top frosting. Just push them into that modelling chocolate. Nothing saying they have to be contained to just the white part. And this is how many sprinkles I want, but feel free to go as hard as you like on the sprinkles. Alright, so I'm pretty happy with how that's looking sprinkles wise. I didn't want to go too over the top. So last but not least, it's time for my cherry on top. Move it forward a little bit so it's all in view. Just a little dab of water on that fondant circle on top. Take your lovely gobstopper, orange ball, whatever it is you're using, and I just like to give it just a nice little push down to make sure that it's secure. But because we've put that lovely little curl at the top with that fondant underneath the icing, you should have a nice little, I guess a little bed for your big cherry to sit in. So there's your completed giant classic cupcake. I think you'll agree it's simply gorgeous. It's just lovely for any occasion, and find me someone that's not going to like this. Thanks very much for watching.